Welcome to episode number 5, The Unity of Ruach, When Unified Breath Unlocks Supernatural Breakthrough, by Audra V. Abraham. This book explores the concept of Ruach, which is presented as the breath of God and a key element in achieving supernatural breakthrough through unity. It emphasizes that true unity in prayer is not just agreement, but spiritual alignment and shared rhythm among believers, which is essential for divine flow and commanded blessings, contrasting individual prayer with the amplified power of unified prayer. It outlines how practices like aligning hearts, spirits, and breath creates a conduit for supernatural provision, while discussing concepts like watchman walls and Ruach pods as strategic formations for intercession. Welcome to the deep dive as we explore the power of unified Ruach.
Okay, let's dive into the material you shared with us today. We're looking at excerpts from The Unity of Ruach by Audra V. Abraham.
Yes, and it introduces a really fascinating concept.
It really does. This idea that spiritual unity, specifically an alignment in what the source calls breath or Ruach, is actually the key to unlocking, well, supernatural power and breakthrough.
And our mission here really is to explore that idea with you, the listener. We want to kind of navigate these excerpts, pinpoint the core principles.
Yeah, pull out the essentials. How does this spiritual unity, this Ruach, connect to actual, supernatural manifestation?
Exactly. We're aiming to give you the core insights from the source itself.
So we'll start with the foundations, right?
Yeah.
Unpack what the source even means by unified breath.
Then we'll get into some specific, well, the book calls them prophetic equations.
Equations, okay. Intriguing, like formulas for how this unity and breath work spiritually.
Sort of, yeah. And then finally, we'll look at some practical patterns, maybe strategies for actually, living out this Ruach unity.
So getting the essential framework without you having to dig through it all yourself.
That's the goal. We'll highlight things like unified breath releases, supernatural breakthrough, delve into these spiritual equations.
And clarify a crucial point the source makes. Unity isn't just agreeing on stuff.
Right. It's deeper. It's alignment in breath. We'll show you how the source presents that and why it argues it matters so much.
Okay. And it seems to kick off with a core principle or equation mentioned early on.
Yeah, the introductory one, heart 2, heart plus breast to breast plus Ruach divine release.
Right. We're definitely going to explore how the source breaks that down and why it's positioned as so foundational for seeing, well, divine release.
Let's unpack it.
Okay, starting with part 1, Foundations of the United Wind. Chapter 1 talks about the breath within us, that personal connection.
Yes, the Ruach within each person. Vital, absolutely.
But then it immediately pivots to the breath between us. What does the source mean when it says some breakthroughs are reserved for the many?
Well, that's the key distinction it draws.
Right.
It argues that while our personal connection is foundational, God specifically holds back certain, maybe larger moves of his spirit for when believers operate in unity of breath.
Unity of breath, okay. And the source says this spiritual breath is contagious.
Yeah, contagious. Think about it like, well, in the natural, right? If people breathe together rhythmically, it creates a shared atmosphere.
Yep.
Spiritually, the source suggests when Ruach is released in unity, it doesn't just stay inside individuals. It becomes this tangible corporate current.
A corporate current. I like that visual.
Yeah.
Something others can step into.
Exactly. Be carried by it even.
And chapter 1 follows that up with a really critical clarification, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That this unity isn't just agreement, not just being in the same place.
Precisely. The source is very clear. It defines it specifically as alignment.
Alignment, meaning?
Meaning breathing in the same rhythm, being in that same current we just mentioned. It's not just thinking the same thing.
So it's more of a spiritual posture.
Yes. Where hearts synchronize, maybe individual wills yield to the Spirit's collective purpose and the Ruach. It flows through people as if they were one body, one instrument.
And importantly, you don't have to be clones to do this.
Not at all. The source stresses that. Different backgrounds, personalities. None of that matters as much as being surrendered to the same wind, the same Spirit's leading.
Okay, so unity as aligned breath. That flows right into the next idea in chapter 1, the multiplication of wind.
Ah, yes. This is powerful. The source argues that in the spirit realm, unity doesn't just add strength.
It multiplies it.
It multiplies it, creating an exponential release.
Wow. Okay. Examples.
Well, the source points to several biblical ones. Acts 2.1 to 2 is maybe the most obvious. They were unified, then the rushing wind came.
Right, unity first.
Or 2 Chronicles 5.13-14, the priests, the Levites, they were unified in sound and worship.
And the glory cloud descended.
So powerfully they couldn't even minister. The unity preceded the overwhelming presence.
And Ezekiel 37, the dry bones.
Yes. The breath didn't just come from one direction. It came from the four winds converging, unity from different directions bringing life.
So the source summarizes this.
Pretty neatly, yeah. It says something like, 1 intercessor might be a breeze.
Okay.
2 aligned become a current.
Makes sense.
But a whole company, aligned in Ruach, that becomes a rushing, exponential wind.
And it even gives an equation for this.
It does, sort of a foundational one.
Yeah.
Obedient breath plus aligned hearts. Unity equals exponential breakthrough.
The multiplication factor is the unity.
Exactly. The implication being, according to the source, that disunity isn't just inconvenient. It actively shuts down this spiritual multiplication.
Okay, that's a sobering thought. So for multiplication, chapter 2 moves to Psalm 133, the commanded blessing. How does that fit in?
The source interprets Psalm 133 as revealing unity functioning as a kind of supernatural conduit.
A conduit, or like plumbing.
Maybe. Divine infrastructure, the source calls it. It's not just a nice feeling, it's the actual channel that allows the wind, the oil, the anointing, and God's voice to flow properly, without obstruction.
So unity basically removes spiritual static or resistance.
It's a good way to put it. It's alignment for flow. Think of the imagery in the psalm.
The oil.
Yeah, the precious oil flowing from the head, maybe representing divine authority or leadership in the source's view, down over the beard onto the robes.
Touching everyone, every level.
Right. And the dew, like Hermon's dew on Zion, symbolizing refreshing, fruitfulness, divine favor, all flowing because of the unity.
And the really striking part, the part the source emphasizes, is that God commanded the blessing there, life forevermore.
Yes. It argues that unity triggers this commanded blessing. The Hebrew word tsava apparently implies a decree, issued with force.
So when believers align in Ruach,
According to the source, it activates this powerful, irrevocable favor. Heaven responds, the flow opens up, and the blessing isn't just hoped for, it's commanded into being.
another equation for this one.
Yep. Chapter 2 gives us alignment plus atmosphere. Ruach unity, commanded blessing. Alignment and atmosphere multiplied by Ruach unity.
Wow. Okay, so then chapter 3 introduces something a bit different, the power of the threshold. Doorways, how do they relate?
It's not just physical doorways, though that's the starting point. The book frames thresholds as prophetic portals.
Prophetic portals.
Yeah, or spiritual intersections, points where spiritual presence meets physical positioning, where divine transfer can happen or be blocked.
And intercessors have a role at these thresholds.
A key role. They're described as gatekeepers or threshold stewards. Through prayer and alignment, the source says, they have authority over what enters or exits a place, a home, a city.
The examples given are pretty vivid. Exodus 12, the blood on the doorposts.
A threshold marker for divine protection, exactly. Or Ezekiel 10, where the glory pauses at the threshold before leaving the temple.
A point of decision, almost. And Acts 12, Peter showing up at the door.
Right. A physical threshold becomes the point of answered prayer, miraculous release.
So how does unity connect here?
The source suggests that believers filled with Ruach, operating in unified breath, can spiritually charge a threshold.
Charge it, like a battery.
Sort of. They transform it from just a doorway into a supernatural crossing point, a place where breakthrough is welcomed in and darkness is pushed back, an access point for heaven.
Okay, and the equation.
Anointed threshold plus unified breath equals supernatural transfer point. The threshold itself needs to be, in a sense, prepared or anointed, and then the unified breath activates its potential.
Right, so thinking about these foundational ideas, the multiplying power of united breath, unity as a channel for commanded blessing, thresholds as spiritual portals. How could understanding these concepts as the source presents them change things for you, the listener, maybe how you view prayer or community or even your own home?
It definitely shifts the focus, doesn't it? From just individual effort to the massive potential unlocked through alignment with others in the Spirit.
It really does. And it perfectly sets up the next section, which you mentioned earlier, the equations of prayer, moving from why unity matters to how it works.
Exactly. The source lays out these specific prophetic equations, suggesting how spiritual principles, especially involving Ruach unity, lead to tangible supernatural results.
Okay, let's tackle the first one from chapter 4, the one we previewed.
Right. Heart 2, heart plus breast to breast plus Ruach, Ixli, divine release.
So the core idea here is convergence. Intimacy, alignment, and the Spirit's breath all coming together.
Precisely. The source argues divine outcomes aren't just random. They flow from this specific combination. And it defines divine release as that sovereign outpouring, that manifestation that's specifically triggered by this posture, heaven responding.
Let's break down the parts. Heart to heart.
According to the source, this is about the bond of intercessory love, really carrying each other's burdens, like Galatians 6.2 says.
So trust, emotional unity.
Covenant alignment, even, creating a safe space for that deep spiritual connection.
Okay, then breast to breast. That sounds intense.
It's drawn from imagery, like 1 Kings 17, where Elijah stretches himself on the widow's son.
All right, resuscitation.
Exactly. The source sees it as representing a posture of prophetic impartation, deep intimacy, that physical and spiritual closeness where transfer happens.
Transfer what?
Breath, virtue, resurrection power. The source's chart mentions these. It's about profound connection enabling impartation.
And then Ruach ties it all together.
It's the crucial element, the divine breath that binds the heart and breast connection, making it truly supernatural, not just emotional or soulish. It's the spirit flowing through those surrendered, unified vessels.
Enabling supernatural communication movements.
Divine response, yeah. It's the dynamic force that takes that aligned intimacy and activates it for God's purposes.
So when all three converge, the heart bond, the close alignment, the Ruach binding them, the result is divine release.
That's what the source claims. It calls it the secret of the upper room, the strategy behind every revival. Chains break, revelation flows, breakthroughs happen because heaven is responding to that specific combination.
Powerful stuff. Okay, equation 2 from chapter 5.
This one is prayer plus divine alignment equals divine flow.
So prayer alone isn't quite enough.
Prayer is vital, essential. But the source argues that aligned prayer, that's what becomes unstoppable. It contrasts passionate prayer without alignment.
Which can feel like effort without wind. Frustrating.
Exactly. Or like trying to push water through a clogged pipe. Sincere, maybe, but the flow is hindered.
Whereas prayer and alignment facilitates.
Divine flow. The source defines this as that seamless, spirit-led movement of God's presence, power, revelation, flowing through vessels that are in divine alignment.
It feels less like striving, more like being carried.
That's the idea, effortless flow, like a clear channel.
So divine alignment is the absolute key here. How does the source define that?
It's described as a spiritual positioning, where your heart, mind, spirit, motives, even your relationships are ordered under heaven's design, under God's authority.
Posture, not perfection, you said earlier.
Right. And critically, the source emphasizes this alignment starts vertically.
With God first.
Yes. Like Jesus only doing what he saw the Father doing. Get right with God first. Then you can effectively align horizontally with other believers.
Okay, that makes sense. And when this divine flow is happening, what are the results according to the source?
Gifts operate more freely, revelation increases, there's an acceleration, things happen faster, quicker answers to prayer, atmospheres shift more easily.
And the enemy doesn't like this.
Definitely not. The source points out the enemy actively fights alignment because, well, going back to that multiplication principle, aligned intercessors are just a far more potent force.
Which leads us nicely into the third equation in chapter 6.
Right. Obedient hearts plus willing spirits equals provision.
Presented almost like a spiritual law. Obedience plus willingness equals provision.
That's how the source frames it, yes. And supernatural provision is defined pretty straightforwardly. Miraculous divine supply, beyond natural means, heaven responding to need, purpose, obedience, divine assignments.
God funding his own projects, essentially.
Through those aligned with the project, yeah. So the elements, obedience, what's the source say about that?
It's seen as a spiritual positioning. It unlocks movement and actually opens portals to provision. It puts you the right place to receive.
It uses examples like Abraham obeying the call led to immense blessing and inheritance. Or Elijah, obedience during famine led to miraculous food.
Isaiah 1.19 is mentioned too. If you are willing and obedient.
You shall eat the good of the land. Obedience positions you.
And then the second part, willingness. How is that different from obedience?
The source says willingness is what activates the wind. It gives obedience its wings, so to speak.
Okay.
It's described as a yielded, joyful spirit, one that aligns quickly with God's direction. It makes your yes to God like a sail.
Catching the wind of Ruach.
Exactly, propelling you into purpose and therefore into provision. Obedience without willingness can be, well, dutiful but heavy. Willingness adds grace and ease.
And the early church in Acts 4 is the picture of this.
Yes, their obedient hearts and willing spirits led them to share freely. Result: supernatural provision. No lack among them.
So the principle is, provision follows agreement. Heaven funds unity.
And alignment. It flows freely through those synchronized in purpose and posture with God and with each other. God supplies where his will is being willingly and obediently carried out in unity.
Okay, that covers the equations. Now, part 3, prophetic patterns and intercessory strategy. Chapter 7 seems to shift to how this looks in groups.
Right. The idea that moves of God often involve these core groups whose unity attracts the wind. The source talks about a need for collaborative breath.
Collaborative breath.
Yeah.
And it identifies specific types of groups, wind circles.
Yes, wind circles are described in Chapter 7 as these divinely orchestrated convergences,
Yeah.
spirit-filled believers coming together with synchronized breath, a shared burden, a common assignment.
Like spiritual vortexes.
That's the term used, yeah. Marked by rhythm, flow, harmony. It's a community formed by the Spirit. Could be 2 people, could be 12, could be more, who pray in rhythm, move together.
Examples being Jesus' inner circle, the upper room.
Moses and the 70 elders, yeah. Groups aligned in breath become these vortexes that host and amplify God's presence and purpose.
And then there are Ruach pods, smaller units.
Yes, much smaller, more intimate clusters, typically 2 to 5 people, specifically joined by divine breath for a shared, often very specific assignment.
Portable wind tugs.
That's a description used. Designed for deep intercession, maybe impartation, real-time movement, guided by the Spirit. The key is they're often forged by prophetic recognition. God brings specific people together for a task and rhythm, not just friends getting together.
And the equation for these groups.
Surrendered hearts plus shared rhythm, ache, Ruach unity, wind multiplication. Again, that multiplication factor tied to unity.
And the source asks, who do you breathe well with? As a clue to finding these connections.
Right, recognizing that spiritual synergy. Who do you naturally sync up with in the Spirit?
Okay, so from these core groups, Chapter 8 talks about when winds merge, different winds colliding.
Yeah, the idea of distinct spiritual winds, maybe individuals, maybe different wind circles or Ruach pods, coming together, converging for an even greater force, acceleration.
So not just the wind within one group, but multiple streams joining.
Exactly. The source presents this wind convergence as a divine strategy for acceleration, pointing again to Acts 2, people from different nations converging with the unified upper room group.
Acts 4, too. Different parts of the early church coming together.
Right. Or think Old Testament, Jehoshaphat's army, different tribes singing one song, Nehemiah's builders, different families on different gates, but one wall, one purpose.
Azusa Street is mentioned, too.
Yeah, diverse backgrounds converging with this unified hunger for God, resulting in that, well, supernatural eruption.
But there's a warning here, too.
Yes, against competitive wind. Groups thinking they have the exclusive move of God, not honoring others. That prevents the necessary convergence.
So mutual honor is key.
Yeah.
Shared focus.
Absolutely. And the source suggests ways to recognize divine convergence. Repeated themes popping up independently. A tangible increase in spiritual weight when praying together, supernatural ease, confirmation, a clear atmosphere shift.
And the equation for this merging.
Individual wind, humble convergence. Supernatural eruption, your wind, multiplied by humble joining with others.
Okay. Finally, Chapter 9 presents the strategy of the watchman wall, not just scattered watchmen.
No, the emphasis is on a wall, a collective alignment of prophetic intercessory voices standing in unity across, say, a territory.
Why a wall, specifically?
Because, the source argues, a wall synchronized by Ruach forms an unbreachable defense. It references Isaiah 62.6, the watchman appointed on Jerusalem's walls. Unified watch carries more weight, provides sustained atmospheric protection.
And each watchman has a role in keeping the wall strong.
Critically so. Building it requires intentionality, alignment, endurance. Each person needs to submit to the overall structure, maintain their spiritual rhythm, honor the flow through others, guard their specific post or assignment in prayer, and stay sensitive to Ruach.
And when this wall is sealed with breath.
That's when it becomes, according to the source, an impenetrable wall.
Wow. What does that mean practically?
The source talks about the prophetic power of a sealed wall. No gaps, no weak spots, consistency. When it's truly sealed with unified Ruach, there's no spiritual breach, no easy entry for demonic interference. It governs atmospheres, enforces boundaries.
And the equation here.
Positioned watchman plus aligned wind plus sustained breath, impenetrable wall. It takes all three. The right people in place, aligned wind flowing between them, and sustained, consistent breath.
So, thinking about all these patterns and strategies, wind circles, Ruach pods, convergence, the watchman wall, how might recognizing these dynamics, as laid out in the source, change how you, the listener, approach prayer groups, maybe leadership teams, or even just your own sense of spiritual assignment?
It really pushes back against the idea of spiritual isolation, doesn't it? It frames collaboration and Ruach alignment not just as nice, but as strategically essential for certain kinds of impact.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It shifts the focus from just my gifting or my effort to the incredible power the source says is unlocked through that collaborative Ruach-aligned breath.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, the source material really circles back to its core message, doesn't it? This call to return to Ruach alignment.
It makes a pretty bold statement towards the end, something like, heaven is no longer responding to scattered sounds, disjointed winds, or isolated intercessors.
That's quite direct.
It is. Instead, the source claims heaven is responding to a collective cry, a harmonized sound, and a unified breath, implying this unity is becoming maybe a prerequisite for certain levels of divine activity.
And the outcomes we've discussed, divine release, divine flow, that divine eruption,
Are presented as the direct results of embracing and cultivating this kind of unity. The commanded blessing isn't just for crowds, it's specifically for unity, found in that alignment with the Spirit, with Ruach.
the source seems to paint a picture of a current prophetic moment where people are being drawn together for this.
Yeah, a convergence of Ruach carriers for collective flow and impact. That seems to be the sense.
Okay, so a final thought for you, our listener, drawn straight from the material we've explored today. If it's potentially true, as the source suggests, that heaven is no longer responding to scattered sounds, disjointed winds, or isolated intercessors, what does that imply about the personal responsibility each one of us, as individual carriers of Ruach, might have to actively seek out, to cultivate, maybe even protect spiritual alignment with others in our sphere?
That's a challenging question.
It is. What specific step might understanding this call you to take today? Something to think about.
Thank you for joining us for episode number 5, The Unity of Ruach, when unified breath unlocks supernatural breakthrough. Stay tuned weekly as we release more from the Ruach podcast series. You can register for the Ruach School of Prayer by visiting us online at theambassadorsinstitute.org/RSOP. We look forward to helping you reach deeper realms in prayer